very interesting. Okay, the next one is one of the founders of Skype from Estonia. Jaan Tallinn, please.
Hello, I'm Jaan Tallinn, and I'm really glad that Joe covered entrepreneurship and startup topics so thoroughly, because I'm not gonna talk about them. I'm not gonna talk about Skype either. Instead, I'm gonna take a step back and look at the last 24 years of my life and show you what a crazy ride it has been. And also I'm going to, on the second half of the presentation, I'm going to tell you about my current passion, which I think is one of the most important things in the world right now. And I hope some of that will be useful for you. So I'm going to juggle 3 devices here. My story starts at the year 1939. The year was important from 2 aspects as it pertains to my story. First, the World War II led the US Army to develop the first electronic computer. Second, Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that divided up Northern and Eastern Europe between them. Unlike Finns, the Estonian government decided to pass on the opportunity to have our own winter war. So we ended up occupied by these guys. Hence, when I started my programming career in mid-80s, Estonia was still firmly behind the Iron Curtain. A kind soul picked up 4 tech-inclined friends, including myself, from elementary school and allowed them to use the Soviet-style mainframes at his workplace. I didn't find the correct picture of those, so I'm actually using a picture of back here. The mainframes were of type Nairi 4. They were made in Armenia in late 70s. They were capable of about 500,000 instructions per second. If you would draw them on the scale where 1 millimeter corresponds to 1 MIPS, that's billion instructions per second, you would need a magnifying glass to actually see the device. Just a couple of years into my programming career, though, Soviet Union found itself in death throes. The Iron Curtain began to lift, and private enterprise was no longer punishable by jail sentence. This meant, among other things, that imported goods became available, yet at outrageous prices. For example, you could buy an imported PC, but you had to sell 2 houses first. Luckily, there was a workaround, assembling microcomputers from locally available components. One of those components was a Russian clone of Intel 8080 processor. While about 1 million times smaller than the mainframe mentioned above, it had about the same computing power, 500,000 operations per second. Computers produced from such components worked fine, but they were kind of boring, lacking interesting software, and most importantly, games. That's how me and my friend from elementary school ended up programming games. Since we needed all the power we could squeeze out from the machine, we quickly graduated to programming in assembler. Soon though, the economic situation improved. Prices of PCs fell and we started having access to those things. Since we had learned how to make games in assembler, and we were fascinated by the increased power of 16-bit PCs, a couple of millimeters according to our scale here, we decided to make our first proper game. It was our last year in high school and our team saw some changes. A couple of people left and a few joined. Among others was a guy named Ahti Heinla, who later became the chief technical architect of Skype. So this is our first game. It was named Cosmonaut. It featured crude EGA graphics with up to 16 colors. Amazingly enough, we managed to find a businessman who showed the game to his Swedish colleagues and struck a deal to publish the game in Sweden. In today's terms, we did not make a lot of money from that deal. However, since this was in Swedish crowns, while the Russian ruble was in free fall, in terms of local currency, we earned more than our parents had made in a lifetime. So yeah, this is pretty much how we felt. Making games sounded like a great idea. Meanwhile, the Moore's Law was not sleeping. The 486 processor and VGA graphics cards gave game developers bigger hammers to produce better games. Unfortunately, that also meant that competition on games market heated up a lot. And as you can see, you don't need the magnifying glass anymore. This is drawn to scale of power. Nevertheless, we were young and enthusiastic, so we took the challenge. Jokingly calling ourselves Estonian games industry, we proceeded to make about a dozen more games. This was the golden decade. I sometimes drop a tear of nostalgia when I think back of it. The business never made it big though, and at the end of the 90s it received a death blow. This bad boy is Voodoo 2, 3D accelerator card by 3DFX. As you can see from the scale, it had more power than the main processor, meaning that making competitive games suddenly became less about ingenious coding and more about great artistic content. To make sure that we exit the industry, our US publisher, Interactive Magic, decided to go bankrupt in '99. To make matters worse, my second daughter was on her way, so I really needed the money. In short, we were pretty devastated. Well, turned out that we could not have picked a better time to fold our games business. It was the height of the dot-com boom, and every public company had to have an internet portal in order to double their stock price. And the Swedish telco, Tele2, was no exception. After acquiring a web company in Estonia, they started searching for Estonian coders to deliver their portal that they had promised the stock market a year ago. And this is the ad they ran in Estonia. The good news was that it wasn't shy about the reward. The bad news, however, was that it was dripping with acronyms such as PHP, SQL, IMAP, etc. Being mere games programmers, we had no idea what they meant, much less had any experience with those technologies. And the experience, of course, was required in order to apply. Luckily, we saw the ad on Friday, and the application deadline was on Monday, so we had the whole 72 hours to get that experience. By Monday, we not had only acquainted ourselves with the required acronyms, we had built a working prototype. On its about page, we detailed the creation process, carefully leaving out the parts where we had to search the internet or call friends to help us out with our newbie problems. After all, we thought it would not be a good idea to admit that our extensive experience was limited to one weekend. So I got the job and began the year of developing Everyday.com. This is how it looks today, which is almost exactly how it looked 10 years ago. Although the money was good, coming from games industry, we got pretty bored after a year. Luckily, we weren't the only ones at Tele2 who got bored around that time. Niklas Stenström, who was the CEO of Everyday.com, decided to leave the company, along with his friend Janos Friis, in order to ride the dot-com boom. They offered us to join their projects, and we did. That was spring of year 2000. Well, talk about bad timing. Niklas and Janos did not find investors for their projects. Meanwhile, Moore's Law had made another step forward and enabled DSL modems that could actually deliver CD-quality music over the net. Napster and Nutella were all the craze. Again, note the scale on this bottom right corner. So instead of developing another .com, we had to brush up our desktop programming skills again and ended up developing Kazaa. We were, of course, blown away by the reaction. According to some reports, at its peak, Kazaa accounted for majority of bits flowing on intertubes, which I find believable considering that now it's BitTorrent and video. But then the lawsuits hit. I still remember sitting in taxi with Niklas and Janos, driving to a law office in solemn silence. And suddenly Janos goes, "Jaan, aren't you glad that we did this Kazaa thing? Now you can talk to lawyers." While not in court, we did some projects that did not go anywhere, such as a peer-to-peer CDN to compete with Akamai. But then, Moore's Law made its move again. It was the end of 2002, and laptops had really grown in power and capabilities. Not that blip in the red circle, that's our scale. In addition to increased computing power, one new thing that laptops brought to the table was that they came with built-in microphones. Being an international team, we had an itch that needed scratching. So after 8 months of development, we released the first version of Skype. We saw that online counter start ticking upwards, and after a week or two, it was clear that we were onto something big again. What happened next was several books written about it, so I'm not going to expand on it. Let me just say that seeing a company to grow from 7 people to 1,000 is an amazing experience. Well, the parties get more average over time though. So as you know, in the year 2005, Skype was acquired by eBay in one of the largest European tech deals. So yeah, flashback time. However, this time it was different. We did not just make a lot of money, we crossed the line that has "fuck you money" written next to it. That's the technical term for the amount necessary to not worry about your future career anymore. One of the side effects of that is that it makes you ponder. What do you want to do with your life from now on? The obvious options are 1. Retire. 2. Proceed to the next startup. Or 3. Go into VC business. I have a good friend in Estonia who, after selling his company, tried the first option. He moved to Florida and had a blast building a house there. When the house was ready though, he spent 3 weeks sitting next to the pool. Decided that this is really boring. Flew back to Estonia again. This time they picked the second option and became serial entrepreneur. We still argue about it. I say that it's harder to do a startup when you're not hungry anymore. He says that it's actually easier because your hand is not trembling when you take the aim. As for myself, I picked the third option, went along with the other founding engineers of Skype and established our investment company, Ambient Sound Investments. But I kept pondering. As an aside, one thing that happens after having enough money is that time becomes one of your most precious resources. So, for example, it no longer makes sense to take a longer flight in order to save some money. Save money no longer means that you'll have more of it to spend this month. Instead, it means that you'll die 0.02% richer, which is pretty meaningless. However, this drive to save time only makes sense as long as you're doing something worthwhile with it, and not just watching more TV. So how would one go about maximizing the value of activities one spends his or her time on? Meet Richard Hamming, famous mathematician and computer scientist. I was once reading an essay by Paul Graham, another great essayist, as you know, where he, in turn, referred to Hamming's essay called "You and Your Research." Hamming gave the following questions to ask yourself in order to make sure that you're not wasting your time. First, what are the most important problems in your field? Second, are you working on one of them? And third, why not? So as I read this, I started thinking. From one hand, in my field, if my field is technology, then the most important problem seems to be the ones that advance the tech progress the most. Startups and investments that develop technologies that help the most people or otherwise create the most positive change. Therefore, it does seem right to be on the bleeding edge of technological progress, where the impact is the biggest. But is it? This reasoning makes the assumption that the progress continues indefinitely, providing us with an infinite stream of new inventions, each more important than the last one. Turns out this assumption is false. Famous British statistician I.J. Good observed already in 65 that, and I quote, "Let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of any man, however clever. Since the design of machines is one of those intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then unquestionably be an intelligence explosion, and the intelligence of man would be left far behind. Thus the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man ever did make." Such rise of an ultra-intelligent machine was later named technological singularity by American mathematician and sci-fi author Vernor Vinci, because he realized that it's impossible, being an author, he realized that it's impossible to predict the world that's inhabited by creatures smarter than you. Before I go on, let's check where the Moore law has brought us today. This is Cray Jaguar, the most powerful computer in existence. Using our millimeter scale, from previous slides, care to guess how big the picture should be drawn? The correct size should be 2,000 kilometers across, or 1/6 of the diameter of the planet. Just look at it, and think back to the scale at the start of my story. Doesn't it feel profound? Well, if Moore's law holds up, the scale would be surpassed the solar system by middle of the century. Now, of course, it's not known if raw computing power alone would suffice to exceed human-level intelligence. But looking at that kind of power, it would be foolish to bet against it without significant evidence that human brains are somehow special. We do not have that evidence. So what if the singularity happens, one might ask? Why should I care? Well, whatever you think would be the importance of such events, unless you've already read and thought about it, you're probably wrong by several orders of magnitude. Let me put it that way. There have been two major events on this planet that set it apart from the vast majority of planets out there. First, the emergence of life, and second, the emergence of species that have general intelligence, that is us. Singularity, should it happen, would be the third event. The first event, emergence of life, started after evolution. This is how it works. Evolution is a methodological design process that has its limitations. In addition to being quite painfully slow, those limits are the designer does not change. The generations must be very similar to each other, and the changes are random from generation to generation. To witness the products of evolution, just go to a forest. Needless to say, evolution can never produce things like nuclear bomb, because there really is no way of making it step by step from a chicken. Important evolution, although terribly inefficient, was good enough to produce humans, and thus bring about the next major event, the emergence of general intelligence on this planet. With general intelligence, we can have a much more powerful design process, deliberative design. Deliberative design drops two of the three limitations of evolution. No longer are the changes random, and product generations don't necessarily have to resemble each other. Therefore, the process is sped up enormously and takes place over decades instead of tens of millions of years, a millionfold speed up. Whenever you look around in a city, most of the things you see are products of deliberative design. A lot of them are things evolution can only dream about. Note, however, that deliberative design does keep one restriction of evolution. The designer itself does not change. So the rate of progress is limited by the speed we, human beings, think and communicate. Self-improving ultra-intelligent machine, however, if it should come into existence, being both the product and author of deliberative design, would be free of that limitation. Therefore, it would work in positive feedback loop, where every generation would be designed by previous in ever-increasing speed and complexity. If that third event would translate to similar speed increase than the second one did, then the world would change in minutes. Now, whenever I talk to people about ultra-intelligent machines and singularity, there are two main classes of reaction that this causes. First, anthropomorphism, and the second, fatalism. As I'm going to show in the remainder of the presentation, both are mistaken. First, anthropomorphism. As illustrated in this artist rendering, people tend to believe that once a computer reaches human-level intelligence, it will just become one of us. Perhaps with its quirks like having a robotic voice, but otherwise a regular member of our society. This is extremely mistaken, as I hope you realize when you consider the following. Eliza Ryotakovsky is an AI researcher and co-founder of Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence. In one of his research papers, he has written the insight that the cognitive architecture is the human cognitive architecture is a huge store of features designed to operate in the absence of general intelligence, with general intelligence layered on top. To rephrase that, just like our DNA indicates, we're monkeys, with just barely enough intelligence sprinkled on top to sustain a culture. Most of what we consider humane behavior, for example, being moral, showing compassion, caring about the environment, we inherit from animal kingdom due to our evolutionary past, and not because of intelligence. As a piece of evidence, here's a great photo from National Geographic. It shows chimpanzees mourning the passing of one of their elders. Just look at it and realize that you're looking at animal behavior. Behavior machines have no reason whatsoever to exhibit. Therefore, if you compare intelligent machines to aliens from another planet, it is reasonable to assume that those aliens will be actually much more human-like because of their evolutionary origin. In other words, machines will be more alien than aliens. Here's another way anthropomorphism closes our thinking. Because the only other intelligent agents we interact with are other humans, we think that the intelligence scale goes from 0, denoted here with Stone, to the most intelligent human, denoted here with Einstein. Although I've heard assertions that the most intelligent human that has ever lived was actually John von Neumann. In reality, there is no reason to assume that the intelligence scale ends at Einstein. Far from it. Just like an ordinary laptop today can already perform more multiplications per second than the whole humankind put together, we should assume that this is possible to have machine minds that are more intelligent than the entire humankind. So this is really how the general intelligence scale should look like. If we recall the fact that natural evolution, a blind and slow process, has given us enough intelligence to just enough intelligence to distinguish us from monkeys, we should be obvious that the general intelligence scale starts at humans, not ends with them. So much for anthropomorphism. Another mistaken reaction is fatalism, thinking that if intelligent machines are destined to take over the world, all we can do to enjoy our remaining time here and then quietly leave the scene. Not so. Here's a quote from Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom. Basically, we should assume that the superintelligent would be able to achieve whatever goals it has. Therefore, it is extremely important that the goals we endow it with and this entire motivation system is human-friendly. Fatalists forget two things. First, it's us humans who are the creators of those machines. And second, the machines will likely carry their initial goals through the intelligence explosion. If you think about it, the only reason why a rational agent would want to improve itself is to better reach its goals. Just imagine being handed a red pill that is guaranteed to make you stronger and more intelligent. However, the caveat is that it will also make you likely to want to kill people as your primary goal. Would you really take it? In other words, if you push a paperclip factory controller to intelligent explosion, it will want to fill the solar system with tiny paperclips. On the other hand, if you first make sure that the machine cares about humans, it will likely care about us even after the explosion. The choice really is ours. So to summarize my presentation, I have worked with computers for a better part of my life. I have had lots of fun in the process and have made a bunch of money. But looking back, I'm grateful that the computers that I worked with were really, really, really slow. So it was safe to play with them while being blissfully unaware of the singularity. In this century, this is a luxury we no longer can afford. Please keep that in mind when you find yourself on the bleeding edge of technological progress. Finally, some process to the further information on singularity. Thank you. Questions?
Any questions? Easy stuff.
So what's your definition or measure of intelligence?
Good question. I actually included light but deleted it for brevity. My definition of intelligence is ability to modify the future to better fit with your goals. So if you think about that's the definition of general intelligence, by the way, not just intelligence. If you think about the ways the future, the life can play out, and if you could pick the future, what is the best to you, and then you have another agent who is doing the same, the one who wins that game is more intelligent. So if you, to give a simple example, if there's a chess game, both parties have see the future where they win the game. And then the one who wins the game is more intelligent. But that's generalized to all the possible futures. So what it actually means is that, sorry, because like I said, that's my passion, so I can go for hours to talk about it. It has nothing to do with, I never mentioned the word consciousness here. It's like completely possible that the machines that take over are not conscious at all. They're like as conscious as the laptops are. They just have to have enough optimization power. That's the technical term.
But you assume it wants to have a future.
Sorry?
But a big assumption in your thing then is, I'm not saying it's an unreasonable assumption, but a big assumption is that the super intelligent whatever thing wants to have a future, that it cares about the future. It doesn't want to lay down at the beach or in Florida, right?
The assumption is that it has some initial goals.
Yeah.
Whatever those goals is. And the second assumption, which is easier, is that it's rational. It's not going to like just throw those goals out and because like machines usually don't do that. They do what they're told. And that's what it means to get closer to your goals.
Okay, let's have 2 more questions, then we have a break and you can continue during the break. Here was one and then that one.
What's your prediction for the date of the Singularity?
I'm being very careful here actually. It's my I think that there's over like double-digit probability, over 10% that is going to happen this century. I think it's significantly over 10% though. But I'm just, since I don't know enough, since we don't know enough how the brain works, for example. But there are several ways how we could achieve it. One is to actually develop like sort of pure artificial intelligence that starts improving itself. The other way is brain simulation, and we know the brain simulation roadmap is going to take us to the brain simulation in about 20-30 years, which is essential.
Okay.
Yeah. What about identity? Because we are talking now more on the hardware part. If you make a comparison with a computer, laptop, you're talking about the hardware, not on the software. So, what would be one singularity more? I mean, only one, because then if they start to be recognizing 2, then they have to understand the difference between me and the others.
I think
you said that and they can be like a laptop, so it doesn't know what it is itself. That can be, but he has to know the environment. So
I think you are veering on anthropomorphism here because you're thinking that there's going to be a society of them.
No, I'm asking, can be without a society. I mean, can be only one entity.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's even more likely that there's going to be only one entity because if the thing is going to explode in minutes, like which is just like it might not happen that way, and especially if we're careful and we know what we're doing, it's our responsibility to make sure that it's not going to happen in minutes. But if it's going to happen in minutes, there can be only one.
But it still has to understand the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. That's the definition of general intelligence. Like I said, it's about picking the future. And in order to pick a future, you have to understand about your environment, about the entirety of it, not just like the pieces on the chessboard. You have to understand everything, like how the nature works. One of the things, actually, interesting things, is that if it really gets into positive feedback loop, in just a few minutes it's going to understand the laws of nature better than we do. Meaning that from our perspective we're going to see magic things, like we just see that some things are going to happen that we had no idea that were possible. Like, if we're lucky, it might mean that it's going to just jump off to another dimension and leave us alone here. but I wouldn't bet on it.
All right. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I hope you can stay here for a while. I believe we have a few people asking questions based on this. Okay, now we're going to have a small break and then we'll continue with the final pitches from the team. So please visit the demo area. There are some refreshments available, beer as well, if you want to have a couple of beers. We'll bring out some wine. So visit the teams and I'll see you back here in a while. Thanks.